I never thought a 100-pound bag of rock salt would land me in small claims court, but that's exactly what happened when Patricia Whitmore, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA in Rochester, Minnesota, decided she had more rights to my property than I did. It started on a Tuesday morning in late January when I was loading supplies into my garage. I'm Owen Ingram, and I run a small landscaping business that pivots to snow removal during the brutal Minnesota winters. That particular winter was shaping up to be one for the record books, with snow forecast nearly every other day and temperatures that made your face hurt just stepping outside. I had just returned from the hardware store with my truck bed full of rock salt, 50 bags in total, each weighing 100 pounds. 5,000 pounds of the stuff, all told. It represented a significant investment, nearly $1,200, but it was essential for my contracts with 3 local businesses and a senior living facility that absolutely could not have icy walkways. I was in the middle of stacking the bags along the back wall of my garage when I heard the sharp click of heels on my driveway. I knew that sound. Everyone in Meadowbrook Estates knew that sound. It was Patricia, and she was on a mission. "Owen," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone that suggested whatever came next was going to be a problem. "Owen, I need to speak with you immediately." I straightened up, my back already protesting the morning's work, and turned to face her. Patricia was 53 years old with that particular haircut that had become a meme on the internet. The kind that screamed manager request before words even left her mouth. She wore a puffy white coat despite the cold, the kind that probably cost more than my entire winter wardrobe, and carried a clipboard. She always had a clipboard. "Morning, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What can I do for you?" She strode into my garage without invitation, her eyes immediately locking onto my salt supply. "I see you've been hoarding rock salt." I blinked. "Hoarding? I just bought this for my business. I have contracts to fulfill." "The HOA has decided that all rock salt supplies within Meadowbrook Estates are to be pooled together for community use," she announced, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "It's only fair. Some residents can't get to the store easily, and with this weather, we need to ensure all common areas and walkways are properly maintained." I felt my jaw tighten. "Patricia, this is for my business. I have paying customers who depend on me to keep their properties safe. I can't just donate $1,200 worth of salt to the HOA." Her expression hardened. "According to Section 12, Subsection D of the HOA bylaws, the board has the authority to requisition materials during emergency situations for the benefit of the community." "We're not in a state of emergency," I said, my patience already wearing thin. "There's snow, yes, but this is Minnesota in January. This is normal. And I've read the bylaws, Patricia. That section is about natural disasters like tornadoes or floods. It doesn't give you the right to take my business supplies." "I'm afraid you're misinterpreting the language," she said, making a note on her clipboard. "The board will be holding a vote tonight, but I wanted to give you advance notice that we'll be collecting community salt supplies starting tomorrow morning." "You can vote all you want," I said firmly. "You're not taking my salt. I bought it. It's for my business, and it's not subject to HOA rules." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Everything within Meadowbrook Estates is subject to HOA rules, Owen. I suggest you review your paperwork." She turned on her heel and left, her footsteps echoing back down the driveway. I stood there, staring after her, a knot of anger forming in my chest. I had lived in Meadowbrook Estates for 6 years, and while Patricia had always been particular about rules and regulations, this was something else entirely. This was theft dressed up in bureaucratic language. That evening, I attended the HOA board meeting held in the community center, a small building at the entrance to our subdivision. About 20 homeowners showed up, most of them probably curious about what new rule Patricia had concocted this time. The board consisted of Patricia as president, Tom Hendricks as vice president, and Susan Martinez as secretary. Tom was a retired postal worker who generally went along with whatever Patricia wanted, and Susan was a nervous woman who seemed perpetually afraid of conflict. Patricia called the meeting to order with her usual efficiency, running through standard business about landscaping bids for the spring and a complaint about someone's trash cans being visible from the street. Then she got to what she called emergency measures. Given the severe weather conditions, she began, the board proposes that all rock salt supplies within the community be temporarily requisitioned for use on common areas, and to assist elderly or disabled residents who cannot maintain their own walkways. That's my business inventory, I said immediately, standing up. You can't just take it. No one is taking anything, Patricia said smoothly. We're pooling resources for the common good. You'll be reimbursed at cost once the weather emergency passes. What weather emergency? I demanded. It's winter. It snows. This is not an emergency, and you know it. An older woman, Mrs. Chen, raised her hand tentatively. I think it's a nice idea. My grandson can't always come over to salt my walk, and I nearly fell yesterday. Mrs. Chen, I said, trying to keep my voice gentle, I'm happy to help you with your walkway. I'm not against helping neighbors. I'm against the HOA taking my business supplies without my permission. The HOA isn't taking anything without proper procedure, Patricia interjected. We're voting on this measure now. All in favor? Tom and Susan raised their hands immediately. Patricia nodded. Motion passes. Owen will begin collecting the salt tomorrow at 9 a.m. This is illegal, I said, my voice rising. You can't vote to steal my property. Watch your tone and your accusations, Patricia snapped. This meeting is adjourned. I left the community center furious. When I got home, I immediately called my friend Marcus, who was a lawyer, though he specialized in corporate law rather than HOA disputes. He listened to my story and then sighed. Legally, they're on shaky ground, Marcus said. HOAs have broad powers, but they can't just confiscate personal property, especially business inventory. That said, fighting it could cost you more than the salt is worth. Small claims court has a limit of $15,000 in Minnesota, so you could file there, but you'd need to prove damages beyond just the cost of the salt. So, what do I do tomorrow when she shows up to take it? You could refuse entry to your garage, make it clear you don't consent, and document everything. If she takes it anyway, that's theft and you have grounds to sue. Get cameras, get witnesses if possible, and keep all your receipts. I thanked Marcus and spent the rest of the evening setting up a cheap security camera in my garage that would record to my phone. I also called my neighbor, Dave Richardson, who had watched the whole interaction that morning. Dave was a good guy, a firefighter with common sense and no love for Patricia's overreach. He agreed to keep an eye out tomorrow morning and be available as a witness if needed. I barely slept that night, alternating between anger and disbelief. In the morning, I positioned myself in my garage at 8:45, my phone charged and ready to record. Dave stood in his driveway, clearly working on his truck but obviously watching my place. At precisely 9 a.m., Patricia's white Cadillac pulled into my driveway. She got out, but she wasn't alone. Tom was with her, along with two young guys I didn't recognize, probably hired help. They had a large pickup truck trailing behind them. Owen, Patricia said briskly, we're here to collect the community salt supply. Patricia, I said calmly, keeping my phone recording in my hand, I do not consent to you taking my property. This is business inventory. You have no legal right to it. The HOA board voted on this measure, she said, gesturing to the men. Please move aside. I'm not moving aside, and you're not coming into my garage, I said firmly. If you take that salt, it's theft. Patricia's face flushed red. This is HOA property, all of it, and you're interfering with board duties. My garage is not HOA property. The salt inside is not HOA property. You need to leave. She stood there for a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd back down. Instead, she turned to the two young men. Get the salt. Madam, one of them said uncertainly. If he's saying no, I'm authorizing this on behalf of the HOA board, Patricia snapped. Get the salt. I stepped directly into the doorway of my garage. You're not coming in here. Tom put a hand on Patricia's shoulder. Patricia, maybe we should call the police and sort this out officially. We don't need police, she said irritably. Owen, you're in violation of HOA rules. Move aside or face fines. Call the cops, I said. Please, I'd love to have them here to see this. Dave walked over from his driveway, his presence solid and reassuring. Morning, folks. Everything all right here? This doesn't concern you, Dave, Patricia said sharply. Looks like it might, Dave said mildly. Seems like someone's trying to take Owen's property without permission. Patricia's jaw clenched, and then she did something I genuinely didn't expect. She turned to the two workers and said, Go around him. Get the salt. The workers looked at each other uncomfortably but started moving forward. I stood my ground in the doorway, and Dave moved to stand beside me. This is getting recorded, I said clearly, holding up my phone. If you physically move me or take that salt, it's assault and theft, and the police will be called immediately. The workers stopped again, clearly not eager to be part of whatever legal mess this was becoming. Patricia made a sound of disgust, pushed past me, actually physically pushed me, and grabbed one of the salt bags herself. She was a small woman, and the bag weighed 100 pounds, so she mostly just dragged it a few inches before one of the workers, looking miserable, helped her. Get it loaded, Patricia ordered. All of it. I was already dialing 911. Yes, I need police at 847 Meadowbrook Lane. Someone is stealing my property right now. The dispatcher asked if there was immediate danger, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could while watching Patricia direct the workers to load bag after bag of my salt onto their truck. Dave stood beside me, arms crossed, bearing witness to the whole thing. It took about 15 minutes for a patrol car to arrive, and by that time, they had loaded 30 of my 50 bags. The officer who stepped out was a woman in her early 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. Her name tag read Officer Larson. What's going on here? She asked. Everyone started talking at once, but Officer Larson held up a hand. One at a time. Sir, you called. Explain. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. The HOA meeting, the vote, my refusal to consent, and Patricia taking the salt anyway. Patricia interrupted multiple times, trying to explain about HOA authority and emergency measures, but Officer Larson kept redirecting to me. You have proof of purchase for this salt? Officer Larson asked. I pulled out my phone and showed her the receipt from the hardware store, dated the day before, showing the purchase of 50 bags of rock salt at $24 per bag. She examined it, then looked at Patricia. Madam, do you have documentation that gives you the authority to take this gentleman's property? The HOA bylaws, Patricia said, thrusting her clipboard at the officer. Section 12, subsection D, the board has emergency requisition powers. Officer Larson scanned the page, then shook her head. This says natural disasters or acts of God. Snow in Minnesota in January doesn't qualify. Madam, you need to return his property. "This is an HOA matter," Patricia said indignantly. "The police shouldn't be involved in civil issues." "Theft is a criminal matter," Officer Larson said flatly. "You have two options. Return his property now, or I can write up a report for theft and he can pursue charges." Patricia's face went through several shades of red. "This is absurd. The HOA board authorized this action." "The HOA board doesn't have the authority to override property rights and theft laws," Officer Larson said. "Unload the salt, please." The two workers immediately started unloading bags, looking relieved to have clear direction from someone. Patricia stood rigid, her clipboard clutched to her chest, radiating fury. Tom had retreated to his car and was pretending to check his phone. Once all 30 bags were returned to my garage, Officer Larson took statements from me, Dave, and Patricia. She handed me a card with a case number and said I could file a formal complaint if I wanted to pursue charges or a restraining order. After they left, Dave helped me restack all the bags properly. "That woman is something else," he said, shaking his head. "Thanks for having my back," I said. "Anytime, man. That was crazy. You going to sue her?" I thought about it. "I don't know yet. I need to think about it." But Patricia made my decision for me. That night, I received an email from the HOA board. It informed me that I was being fined $500 for interfering with HOA board duties and another $500 for creating a public disturbance. The fines were due within 30 days, or a lien would be placed on my property. I stared at my computer screen in disbelief. She was actually doubling down. After trying to steal my property after being told by a police officer that she was in the wrong, she was now trying to fine me $1,000 for stopping her. I called Marcus again. This time, I was done being polite. I wanted legal action. "You've got a solid case," Marcus said after I explained the latest development. "Document everything, send her a certified letter demanding she rescind the fines, and if she doesn't, file in small claims court. You can sue for the cost of your time, the harassment, and emotional distress." Judges don't like HOA overreach, especially when it's this blatant. I spent the next day drafting a letter with Marcus's help. It was formal and clear. Rescind the fines within 10 days, issue a written apology, and agree not to attempt to take my property again, or I would file suit. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested, and waited. 8 days later, I received the return receipt showing Patricia had signed for it. 2 days after that, the 10-day deadline passed with no response. I filed my small claims court case the following morning. In Minnesota, small claims court is designed to be accessible without a lawyer, though I knew Marcus would coach me through preparation. I sued the HOA for harassment, for the attempted theft of my property, for the illegal fines, and for my time and distress. I calculated my damages at $3,000, $1,200 for the value of the salt they attempted to steal, $1,000 for the bogus fines, and $800 for my time dealing with all of this, based on my hourly rate for my business. The court date was set for 6 weeks out, in mid-March. In the meantime, I received 2 more letters from the HOA. The first increased my fine to $1,500 because I hadn't paid the original $1,000. The second informed me that my lawn violated HOA standards because I had winter snow markers placed in it, which apparently weren't approved decorations. That fine was $250. I documented everything, saved every letter, and prepared my case. Dave agreed to testify as a witness. I also subpoenaed the HOA's meeting minutes and bylaws, wanting to show the judge exactly what Patricia had tried to claim as her authority. The weeks crawled by. Meanwhile, Patricia seemed to be on a crusade. She started finding violations everywhere I looked. My garbage cans were out 15 minutes past the 7 a.m. collection time on pickup day. $50 fine. My truck was parked in my driveway overnight instead of in my garage. $100 fine. I had a package on my porch for more than 24 hours. $75 fine. Each fine was documented, photographed where possible, and added to my growing case file. Marcus was almost gleeful. "She's burying herself," he said. "This is harassment, clear as day. The judge is going to have a field day with this." Finally, March arrived, and with it the court date. I dressed in business casual, gathered all my documentation into a neat folder, and arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. The small claims court was held in a modest courtroom, nothing like the dramatic settings you see on TV. Judge Warren presided, a man in his 60s with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. Patricia arrived with Tom and Susan in tow, all three of them dressed formally. Patricia had a rolling briefcase full of what I assumed were HOA documents. She looked confident, like she expected to walk in, cite some bylaw, and walk out victorious. When our case was called, we both approached the bench. Judge Warren looked at his paperwork, then at us. "This is Ingram versus Meadowbrook Estates HOA, case number 2026 SC 14432. Mr. Ingram, you're the plaintiff. Please state your case." I took a breath and began. I explained the timeline clearly. My purchase of salt for my business, Patricia's demand at the HOA meeting, her attempt to take it despite my refusal, the police intervention, and then the barrage of fines and harassment that followed. I presented my receipts, the police report, photos of the salt in my garage, copies of all the fine letters, and Dave's written statement. I kept my emotions in check and stuck to facts. Judge Warren listened attentively, making occasional notes. When I finished, he turned to Patricia. "Mrs. Whitmore, your response." Patricia launched into an explanation about HOA authority, about Section 12 subsection D, about community responsibility, and about how I was being selfish by hoarding resources during a difficult winter. She presented the HOA bylaws and meeting minutes showing the board vote. "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Warren interrupted, "did you take Mr. Ingram's salt from his garage?" "The HOA collected community resources, yes," Patricia said stiffly, "after he explicitly refused consent. The board had voted to authorize the collection." "Did you pay Mr. Ingram for this salt?" Patricia hesitated. "We intended to reimburse at cost after the emergency." "Was there a declared state of emergency in Rochester at that time?" "It was an HOA determination. Was there a declared state of emergency by the city, county, or state?" "No. But so you took his property, worth over $1,000, without his consent, without payment, and without any actual emergency." Judge Warren's voice was flat. "That's called theft, Mrs. Whitmore." Patricia's face went pale, then red. "The HOA bylaws give us authority. I've read Section 12, subsection D," Judge Warren said, holding up a copy. "It specifies natural disasters. Snow in Minnesota doesn't qualify." "What else justifies these fines you levied after the attempted theft?" Patricia fumbled through her documents. "Mr. Ingram interfered with board duties and created a public disturbance." "By refusing to let you take his property." Judge Warren's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to be very clear. HOAs have limited authority granted by contract and by law. That authority does not extend to theft. It does not extend to retaliatory fining." Looking at this timeline, you attempted to take Mr. Ingram's business inventory, were stopped by police, and then fined him repeatedly for various minor or non-existent violations over the following weeks. This is textbook harassment. "Your Honor, the HOA has a responsibility to the community. The HOA has a responsibility to follow the law, Judge Warren said firmly. And you didn't. Mr. Ingram, you're asking for $3,000 in damages. Yes, Your Honor, I said. $1,200 for the value of the salt misses. Whitmore attempted to take $1,000 for the illegal fines she levied, and $800 for approximately 20 hours of my time dealing with this situation at $40 per hour, which is my business rate. Judge Warren looked at Patricia. Do you dispute these numbers? The fines were legitimate, Patricia insisted. They were retaliatory and baseless, Judge Warren said. I'm ruling in favor of the plaintiff. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA is ordered to pay Owen Ingram $3,000 in damages within 30 days. Additionally, all fines levied against Mr. Ingram are hereby nullified and must be removed from his HOA account immediately. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm also ordering you to issue a written apology to Mr. Ingram and to refrain from any further harassment. If I see another case like this come across my desk involving you and this HOA, I'll be considering sanctions. Do you understand? Patricia stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Yes, Your Honor, she finally managed. Furthermore, Judge Warren continued, I'm ordering the HOA to replace the 30 bags of rock salt that were removed from Mr. Ingram's property during the incident. Even though they were returned, the disruption to his business and the principle of the matter warrant this. Purchase 30 bags of equivalent rock salt and deliver them to Mr. Ingram within 14 days, separate from the monetary judgment. Your Honor, that's an additional $720, Patricia protested. Then you shouldn't have taken his property in the first place, Judge Warren said. Case closed. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I could breathe again for the first time in weeks. Dave, who had taken the morning off to be available if needed to testify in person, was waiting in the hallway. When I gave him a thumbs up, he broke into a huge grin. You win, he asked. Total victory, I said. She has to pay me $3,000, nullify all the fines, apologize, and replace the salt. Dave laughed. I bet that killed her. It probably did. Over the next 2 weeks, I received the official court judgment in the mail, along with a check from the HOA for $3,000. The check was signed by Susan Martinez, not Patricia, which I found interesting. A few days later, a written apology arrived. It was brief, obviously written by a lawyer and completely devoid of any actual remorse, but it existed. On the 14th day exactly, a delivery truck arrived with 30 bags of rock salt. The delivery guy helped me unload them into my garage. You the guy who sued the HOA lady? He asked. Yeah, I said, surprised. He grinned. She was mad as hell when she placed this order. Couldn't have happened to a nicer person. My mom lives in a neighborhood with an HOA like yours. I know the type. After he left, I stood in my garage, looking at my salt supply, now fully restored and then some. I felt vindicated but also exhausted. The whole experience had been draining in ways I hadn't anticipated, but it wasn't quite over. About a week after the salt delivery, Dave came over looking excited. Did you hear? Hear what? Patricia resigned from the HOA board. Well, resigned is a nice word. Apparently, several homeowners got together and called a special meeting to vote her out. The court judgment was public record, and once people saw what she did, they were furious. Tom's out too. Susan's staying on, but they're doing a special election for president and vice president. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Good, maybe we'll get someone sane this time. Actually, Dave said, looking a little sheepish, a bunch of us were talking and we think you should run. I stared at him. You're kidding. You stood up to her. You know the bylaws better than most people now after all this, and you're reasonable. We need reasonable. I thought about it for about 2 seconds. No way, I just spent 2 months dealing with HOA drama. I'm done. Dave laughed. Fair enough, but think about it. The election's not for another month. I did think about it over the next few days, but my answer didn't change. I had no interest in being part of the HOA board. What I wanted was for the HOA to be basically invisible, handling the essentials like snow removal for common areas and maintaining property values, without the power trips and overreach. The election happened in April. A retired teacher named Margaret Foster won the presidency, running on a platform of common sense and transparency. Her first act was to review and revise the bylaws with input from homeowners, clarifying limits on board authority and establishing an appeals process for fines. It was everything Patricia's reign should have been and wasn't. Meanwhile, my business thrived. The publicity from the case because, yes, local news picked up the story of the HOA president ordered by a judge to replace stolen salt actually brought me new clients. People liked the idea of supporting someone who stood up to bureaucratic overreach. By the time spring arrived and I transitioned back to landscaping, I had more contracts than I could handle and was considering hiring help. I ran into Patricia once, at the grocery store in May. She was in the produce section, examining tomatoes, and I almost turned around to avoid her. But then I thought, why should I? I hadn't done anything wrong. Hello, Patricia, I said evenly. She looked up, her expression hardening immediately. Owen, how are you? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Fine, she said curtly, then after a pause, I still think I was right. The community needed that salt. I shook my head. The community has a budget and could have purchased salt. You wanted to take mine because it was convenient, not because it was right. I was trying to help people, she said, and for the first time, I heard something other than anger in her voice. It almost sounded like she believed it. Help doesn't involve taking other people's property without permission, I said. If you'd asked, if you'd offered to pay, if you'd treated it like a business transaction instead of an HOA edict, we wouldn't have ended up in court. She didn't respond, just turned back to the tomatoes. I moved on to the lettuce, and that was that. We never spoke again after that day. Life in Meadowbrook Estates settled into something resembling normalcy. Margaret Foster proved to be an excellent HOA president, running meetings efficiently and treating homeowners with respect. The harassment stopped. The petty fines disappeared. The neighborhood became a place I was actually happy to live again. Looking back on the whole experience, the thing that struck me most wasn't Patricia's overreach or even the vindication of winning in court. It was how easily people could convince themselves that authority justified anything. Patricia genuinely believed that her position as HOA president gave her the right to take my property. She dressed it up in language about community and emergency and the greater good, but at its core, it was about power and control. The judge's ruling wasn't just about the salt or the money. It was a clear statement that laws applied to everyone, that HOAs weren't above basic property rights, and that harassment had consequences. Judge Warren could have simply ordered the fines nullified and called it a day. Instead, he made Patricia replace what she tried to take, driving home the point that actions have consequences. My case became something of a local legend in Rochester. I'd hear stories from other people about their HOA battles, usually involving less dramatic disputes, but the same underlying issue. Boards that forgot they served homeowners, not ruled them. Several people told me they used my case as precedent in their own small claims disputes with HOAs, and I was happy to help where I could. Dave and I became closer friends through the whole ordeal. He'd invite me over for barbecues, and we'd sit on his deck, drinking beer and laughing about the absurdity of it all. His wife, Jennifer, made a joke about getting me a shirt that said HOA Warrior, and I told her I'd wear it to the next board meeting. I never did, but the thought made me smile. The 30 replacement bags of salt were more than I needed, so I ended up donating 10 bags to Mrs. Chen and a few other elderly neighbors who really did struggle with maintaining their walkways. Mrs. Chen was grateful and apologetic, saying she hadn't understood at the meeting that Patricia was trying to take my business inventory. I assured her it wasn't her fault. She'd been manipulated by someone who was good at making unreasonable things sound reasonable. That's Patricia's real skill, I realized. She could frame the most outrageous demands in language that sounded official and proper, and for the good of everyone. It was only when you stepped back and looked at what she was actually saying that you realized it was nonsense. The judge saw through it immediately, but it had taken me and many others longer. By the time summer rolled around, the whole salt incident felt like something from another lifetime. I was busy with landscaping contracts. The HOA was functioning smoothly under new leadership, and Patricia had become just another neighbor I occasionally saw but never interacted with. She and her husband kept to themselves, and rumors swirled that they were considering moving, though nothing came of it. The lawsuit had cost me time and stress, but winning felt important beyond just the money. It established a precedent, at least locally, that HOAs couldn't just do whatever they wanted. It showed that standing up to unreasonable authority was worth it. And it reminded everyone in Meadowbrook Estates that they had rights, even within the confines of HOA regulations. I framed the court judgment and hung it in my office at home, not out of spite, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's easier to just go along. A reminder that laws matter and that courts, when functioning properly, can protect the little guy from those who abuse power. And a reminder that a 100-pound bag of rock salt could become the symbol of something much larger. Marcus, who had coached me through the preparation, refused to let me pay him for his time. "Consider it a public service," he said. "Someone needed to put Patricia in her place, and I'm glad it was you." The whole experience also taught me something about community. Real community isn't about enforcing conformity or wielding authority. It's about neighbors helping neighbors, about respecting boundaries, and about working together when it actually matters. The people who stepped up to vote Patricia out, who supported me during the lawsuit, who shared their own stories of HOA overreach, those were the real community, not the artificial structure created by rules and bylaws. I never did run for the HOA board, despite repeated suggestions from Dave and others. I preferred to remain an informed and active homeowner without the burden of official responsibility. I attended meetings, I voted when important issues came up, and I made sure to read the bylaws thoroughly so I knew my rights. But I left the actual governance to people like Margaret, who seemed to genuinely enjoy that kind of work. The following winter was milder than the previous one, with less snow and higher temperatures. I still stocked up on rock salt, though not quite as heavily. When Patricia's next-door neighbor, an older man named Frank, slipped on ice and couldn't get to the store, I gave him 2 bags of salt free of charge. He tried to pay me, but I waved him off. "Community support," I said with a slight smile, and he understood the reference. Frank told me later that Patricia had watched from her window as I helped him load the salt into his car. He didn't know what her expression had been, and I didn't ask. It didn't matter. I wasn't helping Frank to spite Patricia. I was doing it because it was the right thing to do, because that's what actual community looks like. The monetary judgment from the lawsuit went toward upgrading my business equipment. I bought a newer used plow for my truck, one that was more efficient and required less maintenance. Every time I used it, I thought about the salt incident and smiled. Patricia had tried to take from me, and instead, she'd ended up funding an improvement to the very business she'd tried to undermine. Years might pass before I fully process everything that happened during those strange months. The anger I felt watching Patricia direct workers to load my salt onto her truck. The frustration of dealing with petty fine after petty fine. The anxiety of preparing for court, worried that somehow the judge might side with the HOA despite the clear facts. And finally, the relief and vindication of winning, of having authority validate what I knew all along, that she was wrong. But more than any of those emotions, what stayed with me was a renewed faith in the legal system and in the power of documentation. Officer Larson had stopped the theft in progress because I had receipts and a clear timeline. Judge Warren had ruled in my favor because I presented facts, not emotions. The court ordered Patricia to replace the salt because the law supported property rights over HOA overreach. I'd heard so many stories of people rolling over for HOAs, paying unjust fines, accepting unreasonable demands, all because fighting seemed too hard or too expensive or too risky. My case proved that sometimes fighting was worth it. Not just for the money, though that mattered, but for the principle. For the statement that no, you can't just take what isn't yours. No, authority doesn't mean unlimited power. No, I won't be bullied. The written apology Patricia sent still sits in my case file, though I've never looked at it again after the initial raid. It was a requirement of the judgment, nothing more. Real apologies come with understanding and remorse, neither of which Patricia possessed. But the court ordering her to write it, to put on paper that she was wrong, that meant something. It meant the legal system recognized the harm she'd tried to cause. As summer turned to fall and fall back to winter, life in Meadowbrook Estates continued its rhythm. Seasons changed, neighbors came and went, and the HOA functioned as it should, quietly, efficiently, and without drama. Margaret Foster served her term and was re-elected easily. The revised bylaws were approved by homeowner vote. The community thrived not because of authoritarian rule, but because of reasonable governance and mutual respect. I still run my landscaping and snow removal business. I still live at 847 Meadowbrook Lane. I still buy rock salt every winter, though now I keep it in a locked storage unit I rent rather than my garage. Not because I fear another Patricia. Lightning rarely strikes twice, but because I've learned that some things are worth protecting proactively. And every January, when the snow falls and I'm out at 3 a.m. salting parking lots and walkways for my clients, I think about that 100-pound bag of rock salt that started everything. Such a mundane thing, really. Just chemicals used to melt ice. But it became a line in the sand, a point of principle, and ultimately, a victory for common sense over unchecked authority. The judge's gavel coming down, declaring that Patricia must replace what she tried to take, echoes in my memory as one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Not because I'm vindictive, but because justice, real justice, had been served. The little guy had stood up to bureaucratic overreach and won. The law had functioned as it should, protecting rights and punishing abuse. That's the story of how Karen demanded my rock salt supply, how I sued when she took it, and how the judge ordered her to replace it. It's a story about property rights and HOA limits and standing up for what's right. But mostly, it's a story about how even the smallest battles can matter, how principle sometimes requires action, and how victory, when earned through proper channels and righteous cause, tastes sweeter than any revenge ever could. The Salt Patricia was ordered to replace still sits in my storage unit, a monument to that winter when everything went crazy over something so simple. I use it for my business, for helping neighbors, for fulfilling the contracts that Patricia tried to undermine. And every bag I spread, I'm reminded that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, not because you're greedy or selfish, but because letting someone take it without consequence sets a precedent that affects everyone. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way, and it cost her $3,000, 30 bags of salt, her position on the HOA board, and her reputation in the community. I learned that standing your ground, documenting everything, and trusting in the legal process can lead to victory even when it seems unlikely. And Meadowbrook Estates learned that HOAs serve homeowners, not the other way around, and that community is built on respect, not authority. Those lessons will outlast the snow, outlast the salt, and outlast everyone involved in that strange, contentious winter, when a simple landscaping supply became the center of a legal battle that defined property rights and personal principle. The rock salt remains, both literally in my storage unit and figuratively in the collective memory of everyone who lived through or heard about the incident. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought over the most ordinary things, and that victory belongs to those willing to stand firm on principle, document their case, and trust that justice, though sometimes slow, will eventually prevail.